Welcome to today's webinar with Andrew. Thank you very much for being here, Andrew.
No worries.
And Andrew's taking the first step of the year to do the webinar, and we're using a new tool today, so apologies if there are any glitches along the way. I think we're going to be sort of like half an hour to 45 minutes, depending on how the questions go. Andrew's going to take host in a second and have the full control, but I'll be monitoring the questions and the Q&A and be in the background on mute while you're going. Is there anything else I need to remember, Andrew?
Probably not.
So today you're going to share about SaaS business models and your personal journey from Idio, which I personally find very inspiring. And I thank you very much for sharing it today. I think it'll be hugely valuable to people. Of course, you might hide some of the details that you've told us before, but if I see anything that you've missed out, I'll give you an ask along the way, if that's all right.
No, of course. Of course.
Fantastic. Well, yeah, you have, I don't know what nationality Lucas is, if you want to add it in the chat, Lucas, but I can tell you that you've got at least 2 Brazilians on the call already, so.
Fair enough. Well,
right.
we'll try and keep to English, though. I'm not sure my Portuguese is up to scratch.
Come on, you can do it, you can do it. Okay, I'm going to hand over to you to make you the host and stick with you along the way. Here you go. Oh, everybody, as you're started, there is a poll for you to answer. If you can have a look for that, it's just to help shape Andrew in his talk today. So it's how really we can make the most of it for you. Okay, so have a look at the polls and see what you can make of that. Hey, Raphael. All right, here we go, Andrew. It's over to you.
Cool, fantastic. So please shout if you can't hear anything or if any audio goes wrong, or if you have any challenge with any of the other functionalities. Just let's make sure we use the time wisely. I don't want to be talking into a mist. But as Stu said, and thanks for the invite to come on here, Stu. My name is Andrew Davies. I'm one of the co-founders of Idio. I'm going to tell a little bit of the Idio story today, and we're also then just going to walk through some of the basics of what makes a SaaS business. And so I'm going to spend the first kind of 5-10 minutes just setting the scene with Idio, just so it gives some of the stories I'll tell a context. But then as we get into the SaaS fundamentals, then I'll try and bring those to life with some examples from our own journey. I know for myself, the most valuable thing I find is learning from other people who are kind of experiencing life in a different way or a different stage, whether it's earlier or later than I am. Those multiple perspectives are, give strength. And there's been lots of people I've learned on this process. And I think one of the really strong things in the SaaS market generally is there's lots of people starting to talk about best practice, and a playbook is developing. And that's really valuable, because even when what you've built is hugely innovative, the process of scaling a SaaS business, there's a good playbook to follow now, and you don't have to be innovating at every stage of that journey. Focus all of your innovation effort on the product rather than on how to hire an SDR team, because people have done that before, proved how it works, and there's good models to follow. So I'm going to be talking mostly from my Idio journey. So I'm one of the co-founders there. I also sit on the board of a boutique insurance consulting firm that consults large insurance on their innovation efforts and help out with a range of startups. So that's my background. All okay, Stu? Or we good audio and video wise to go ahead?
Yeah, it all looks good to me. The only thing that John's mentioned on the chat is that he can't see the poll. Since I've given you the host functionality, can you just have a quick look at the polls and see if we can add it on?
I don't know how to add it, no.
Should just be at the bottom under polls. It disappeared from my menu when I handed over to you. If not, no worries. I don't want to destroy your flow. Sorry.
I don't have any button for that.
Okay, no problem.
Cool.
Right.
Okay. Sorry about that. Maybe you can shout in the chat what you can get, and we'll make sure we answer the questions afterwards. Feel free to drop questions into chat as we go, and Stu will either moderate them and interrupt me, or we'll get to the end and go through them. So just as a background, let me talk about what Idio does, because hopefully that's helpful just in setting the scene. Because if we don't walk through that, then some of the things I want to talk about are going to be a bit abstract. Idio works with global B2B enterprises that have got hugely complex go-to-markets. We talk about it like a Rubik's Cube. So if you're an IBM or an Intel or a global asset manager, as a head of marketing, you're managing this complex Rubik's Cube. You've got on one vector probably hundreds of products and services. Someone like A big tech vendor might have thousands or tens of thousands of products and services they're selling to market. On another vector, you've got a whole load of different personas, ways of encapsulating your target market. So these might be in industries, verticals, company sizes, and then within any of those personas, so representations of who the buyer is. So you've got hundreds or thousands of products, you've got 10, 50, 100 different personas. And then on the third vector, you're heavily invested into the digital sales process. And so you've probably published 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 white papers, broker notes, blog posts, market reports on your digital properties. And so the marketers at those businesses have this incredibly complicated challenge of fixing the Rubik's Cube. They've got to find a way of delivering relevance. When you land on Intel.com as a prospective buyer, you're faced with 212 products and services. They don't know which persona you're from, and you're faced with 3,000 different white papers you could choose to read. And so that's the challenge that Idio sells into, just as a context. And we'll talk about how we got into that in a little bit. Here's one of those classic challenges. Here's HP's website, and this is their, on the left-hand side, this is their kind of solution set, their nav bar. And the challenge here is with 235 product endpoints, why does everyone see hyper-converged infrastructure as their banner when they go to hp.com? And that's just, the kind of basic challenge. We know obviously lots of people are trying to help large enterprises personalize. And we believe we've got a really differentiated angle on that. So just to set context, that's the problem that Idio is selling into. And we do that for three main verticals: technology, financial services, and information services. And all of these businesses are, this is just some example logos of our clients. All of these businesses have that very complicated go-to-market, are at considerable scale, and have reached some form of maturity in their go-to-market effort, and are recognizing that they're facing this challenge and they can't keep scaling the way they're doing things and achieve this holy grail of one-to-one relevance, which is what they're trying to achieve. They know they're in a competitive marketplace, they've got a limited set of potential customers, and therefore how relevant they are across their digital touch points and their sales and marketing is critical to their future growth as a business. So this is the problem we're selling into, this is the kind of clients we're selling into, and the way we solve it, just to give a bit more context, is that we've built this quite complicated natural language processing engine that basically maps the digital experience of any of these customers. So here's an example from Pure Storage. This is about $1 billion, $2 billion tech firm in the States in storage, as you'd imagine. And what happens is, because we've extracted the topics from every bit of their web content, when a prospect visits a few different pages, we're able to understand what those pages mean and build a very granular and predictive first-party kind of piece of data on that individual, whether we know them or don't know them. And that means that we can predict what they're going to buy, what they're going to read next. We can give that data back to Pure Storage. And we can also execute personalization decisions. And so here's three examples of, we might take over their website, we might take over their email program, take over their retargeting program. And our engine would learn what people are most likely to want next in their journey, and turn that unstructured data into structured data and power personalized marketing across those different channels. So it's something we do in these channels. We pass that data back for better outbound and better sales in their CRM system. And clearly it's a big integration challenge. These, we're not rip and replacing anything. So we have to integrate with all their core systems. And when you're going and selling into an IBM or a Salesforce or an Intel, they've probably already got 50 or 60 vendors in their marketing stack. So we're selling into a complicated marketplace with very mature buyers. I can see we've got some comments and hand raises, Stu. So anything to pause on here, or should I just charge on?
I think it's all good, Andy. It's all good. I'll keep an eye on it. I'll butt in if there's any good questions. But I have to say, just a personal reflection. Obviously, I know you guys started your startup basically from a shared in Exeter, right? So that's an incredible amount of logos and things that you've achieved as a team over the last few years. Really incredible.
Yeah, and it is based on that team, and it's based on a huge amount of mistakes, and we're going to talk through some of those mistakes. I guess one of my opening reflections here would be that certainly when I'm trying to understand and learn from other people's journey. It's super unhelpful for people to tell me how shiny everything is and how perfect and polished everything is. So I'll try and be a little bit warts and all here, because yeah, there's some really nice logos there, and I can show you some lovely, smiley, happy pictures of the 50 staff we've got across London and New York, and our plans to open in San Francisco in the next few months, and all that sounds really cool. That shouldn't gloss over the fact that there's been lots of hell along the way, which Stu, you'll know some of those stories, and we can dig into some of them on this webinar.
Fantastic. Thanks, mate.
Cool. So let's just talk about the background of Idio, of how we've got to that point, and then I'll start working through kind of the basics of a SaaS business model and put some flesh on the bones. So Idio started, myself and my co-founder, it started as a personalized music magazine. So on the left-hand side there, you can see what was idiomag.com. It was a personalized music magazine where we were basically trying to build something. Think Flipboard before Twitter was a data set. We were trying to build something where we could understand your music taste and then deliver you a text, video, and image-based magazine content, digital content, that was only based on your interests. And we went through a process of experimentation, and we initially had these sliders where you'd choose, I'm this interested in pop, and this interested in indie, and this interested in rock. And we realized that like no one fills in those forms. Like no one wants to give their data in that kind of explicit way. And so we rethought about the problem, and we built a very basic natural language processing engine, which learnt your interests based on what you were reading or what you'd been listening to. And so the premise of this magazine was, if you came to idiomag.com, you could pop in your Last.fm username, your Pandora username, or a whole load of other music social networks that are now defunct due to various legal battles, etc. And we would look at what you've been listening, data mine that, understand what those artists, topics, etc. were, and then use that to then recommend the right piece of content for you. So on one side, we have this data portability engine, one of the very first examples of data portability. So you've already listened on Last.fm, and we're going to suck that data out with your permission from their API. And then what we're going to do is we're going to basically curate and aggregate a whole range of content from, licensing agreements with top blogs, top music bloggers, blue music blog networks, people like Rolling Stone. And we've got agreements with all these guys, and we're going to analyze that content for, tours and gigs they're doing, and set lists and artists and genres and geographies, all topics. And now we know and understand this set of content, and we know and understand what you might like. We're going to match those together, and we're going to build you a music magazine on the fly. And that's what Idiomag was. And it was a cool little project. We got to the point where we had 100 or 200,000 readers, and it was paying for the ad revenue. It was paying for myself, my co-founder, and an engineer to build this thing. But we couldn't scale it. We could see that we were just not able to break out. Other people have tackled this challenge since, and there are people like Flipboard that I think do a really good job of executing on this, and our execution just wasn't good enough. The UI wasn't good enough. It was a kind of a page flip magazine initially. It was really clunky, and so the idea was great and the tech behind it was great, but we just couldn't get up this curve. And I remember being in a meeting with BMW's agency, asking them for ad dollars in order to have an advert within Idiomag, a set of adverts, and showing them all the targeting capabilities we could do, because we knew all the detailed music listening interests of our audience. And they said to me, look, we couldn't care less about your 100,000 music lovers. But if you could build a tailored, adaptive proposition for our digital experience to our customers around lifestyle and luxury and automotive, then we'd love to use that kind of thing on our web properties. And we had a few conversations like that, and really the penny dropped, and we realized that actually the strength here wasn't in a consumerized music magazine. It was in the tech we built behind the scenes, which, if repurposed, could help companies interact with their customers in a much more detailed, nuanced, and personalized way.
So this for me is super interesting, Andrew, because you were basically geeky about music, right? That's what started all this. So your inspiration, your passion was about music, but you're realizing that the tech is actually the asset for the business. How do you kind of unlock yourself from that original passion and drive, and even the reason you started the startup in the first place?
So I was, and I am passionate about music, but I'm probably more passionate about business. and that process of creating something out of nothing. And so the frustration of this thing not working as a business entity was much greater than the frustration of moving away from something that I considered a hobby. For me, prior businesses to this, I've been trying at university to try other startups, and they'd included a top-end women's wear fashion label, a mass language translation engine, and a social analytics agency. And so, there wasn't a thread of kind of hobbyist desire that was running through all of them. The hobbyist desire was more around the business than it was about the topic.
I mean, there's an old cliche, the whole Theodore Levitt article about what business are you in. But when you're looking at the startup like that, it's a very hard thing for any founder to say, here's where I'm really passionate. Here's the reason I got up in the morning to start this startup. And actually, I'm going to go over here. That couldn't have been an easy discussion, or at least one. It probably wasn't one discussion, right, to get you there. Is the reason I asked the question is you make it sound really clinical and easy, and I can't imagine it was.
No. So I guess there are a few factors at play. Number one, finance. Like, it was hard to bootstrap a music magazine, and yet there were brands who were kind of saying, we've got budget if you could do something a bit different. Secondly, both myself and my co-founder actually had a B2B background, and so we probably were more comfortable selling to businesses than we were this consumer play. And so there was actually a comfort there rather than something we were scared of. And fundamentally, the thing we were an interesting tech solution in search of a problem, and so this did feel like a problem that was worthy of solving. But no, it wasn't easy. And what we did is we launched a separate kind of domain name, a separate proposition, and had a play with selling that into people before we built it. And so we did some test and learn around that, and we still ran the music magazine for probably a year or two behind the scenes, and just increasingly disconnected them until we realized that we needed to shutter it because it was an embarrassment more than an example by the time we'd moved on and shifted gears on the other side.
And were you making money with Idio straight away, or was it a bit of a leap of faith even at the beginning there?
No, we were, and we'll talk through this in a minute. But yeah, I mean, we won some early clients that were very, very lucrative for us. And so, I mean, to talk through that process, we had to spend several months taking our music-focused text extraction engine and making it globally focused. So moving from a few 100,000 music-related topics to actually what is now 25 million topics in 11 different languages. Now, we just started that journey, but that was big, right? That was a big shift that we needed to kind of lock ourselves away and work on. But once we'd got that, we landed, so our first two contracts, proper contracts, were with Unilever and with Diageo. And they were contracts that funded development. And so we sold something that was kind of there, but a lot of solutions and consulting work around it. And by the time we'd finished those contracts, we had a product that had been built to that specification that was automated.
Okay, thank you so much. Sorry if I interrupted your flow there.
No worries at all. So if you look along the bottom, I've just put some kind of key points along that journey. This first phase of experimentation within music, the second phase of this idea of, there's a B2B thing we can go after. And that's when we won these initial clients. And you can see there the first red comment is product market fit with a question mark, because we thought we'd had it. We landed Unilever, we landed Diageo. Each of those was a 6-figure plus deal per year. And suddenly we could scale our team, we could hire people off the back of that. And so we went and raised seed financing from a really good London VC, from Notion Capital, as a result of that kind of early proof. And we thought that consumer brands like Unilever and Diageo would be a key part of our target market. And about 8 months in, that just collapsed. Both of them churned with very little warning. One of them churned because they decided that they wanted to invest that marketing innovation money in something more innovative. And so they switched on from personalization to Facebook video or something. And the other one, because our contract was via the agency, not the end brand. And in the consumer world, we learned, costly experience, it should be obvious to everyone else, that you're not actually moving their revenue bottom line. If Unilever and Diageo don't sell to consumers, they sell to the trade. Diageo, Guinness.com, etc., they sell to pubs and hotels and clubs. And Unilever, they sell to supermarkets and convenience stores. And so although we were upticking engagement as a result of a more personalized experience, no one cared because it was just a bit of a better performing marketing campaign. So that was our first target market failure. And that made us shift and focus on B2B. So people who actually had a revenue model that we could know and understand. So people who were also themselves selling to businesses. And if we could prove more engagement, we could prove more conversion, we could prove more pipeline, ideally more sales, and that's what they cared about. And so we did that. We won some mid-market B2B companies, raised some more finance, and then we hit target market failure number 2, which was when we started churning all of our cohort of B2B clients, because we'd basically got this music thing, applied it to consumer brands. It was really cool and then died, and then applied it to B2B and it was really cool. And then a lot of them realized after a year being with us that they canceled the renewal, not because we weren't providing value, but the price versus the value just wasn't enough. And we were selling into mid-market growth stage startups or mid-market tech companies, and we would be their most expensive piece of their technology stack. And it just didn't add up. We didn't have a very good customer success model. We weren't close enough to them to really understand what they were doing. And fundamentally, we'd got a very complex solution and they'd got quite a simple problem. And they could just take that same budget and put it on PPC or something very simple and have a much more turnkey solution to their problem of more pipeline. So that was target market failure number 2, which is when we learned that it was our enterprise level customers that had a big enough and a hairy enough and a scary enough problem that Idio was actually matching that problem and solving it using some very interesting automated analytics. And we could retain large enterprises. Perversely, we could retain and impress large enterprises, but we couldn't retain and impress much more simple businesses. And so that's when we decided to focus on enterprise B2B. And really, the rest of this presentation is then working through a SaaS model when you're selling into those large enterprises.
So just a quick question. You don't just walk into Notion Capital and pick up some money easy peasy, and you've also got several rounds of financing when you're talking about these iterations. What sort of pressure was on you from the investors at that point to find the right business model?
Notion, to their credit, are a very founder-friendly fund, and so they have backed us in lots of those twists and turns, and there's been lots of challenges that they've remained founder-friendly on, when I think some other funds probably would have just said, game up, you've had another try and it's not working. At the core of it, there was a technology that was exciting enough and differentiated enough that they could see past that and continue to help us try. And some customer validation that was really powerful. Like we were able, being able to open doors, go and sell straight into Unilever and Diageo is impressive, right? And in that second target market, being able to churn a few mid-market companies but retain JP Morgan, that's an impressive feat. And so there was enough positives in there, but it was huge pressure. And multiple times, we've been through a journey where we've raised funds. It's not always been in perfect scenarios, and many times we've had our backs against the wall from a cash perspective. And a bit later on, we'll talk about that cash engine that you need to build behind your business, which we're starting to now. But we experienced extreme amounts of stress in certain pinch points where we were running up against a runway that was very, very, very short, sometimes not in weeks but in days, and just having to find a way to refund the business.
And for people who are on the call that don't know you, you should understand that Andy's also a family man with children and other things going on during this time frame. So short runways had potentially more impact than you care to talk about often, I guess.
Yeah. And, there were a whole lot of other challenges in there, right? So, multiple times we've been at that point where we've had to raise a convertible note or find a way, or directors not take salaries, whatever it might be, to work out a way of pathing through. We've had other external challenges, big client. We had one massive client that cancelled because our chief sponsor left on the final day of renewal, and didn't tell his team about renewing what we had done for them, even though we're hitting all the targets. And I think we had a 30% revenue drop that day in our annual revenue because that one biggest client quit. And it took us another 4 or 5 months to catch back up to a standing start. Now that blew a huge hole in our finances, changed all of our expectations through the year. We've had other challenges. Unfortunately, a couple of years ago, we found that our office manager was cooking the books and fraudulently forging invoices, and to quite a significant amount of money. And we had thought that our expenses were running too high and something was out of whack and we weren't managing things tightly enough. And we dug and we found we had to do report her to the police, and she went through a court case because she was very specifically over time defrauding us of money. And that doesn't look good for your investors. If your investors have put money into your hands and you're going back to them and saying, oh, sorry, we've just found out that the person we really trusted to help us with financial ops hasn't been helping us. So yeah, huge amount of problems that get thrown in there, not just simple ones like, cash.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Sorry to keep going with the flow there on the questions. Hope it's okay.
No, keep going. I've got slides, and if we only get a third of the way through that, it's probably a good thing because it means we're having a conversation. So, and then as you see at the end of this kind of chart here, you get into the scaling challenges and the customer focus. And that's kind of really where we find ourselves now. So we've gone through this journey. So just to put some dates on it, we raised money mid 2013. And that's where kind of that seed finance piece comes in. So everything from there is, target market failure, rebuilding, understanding where we're trying to, where our solution solves an actual problem. And then reworking that on a quarter by quarter cycle to get to where we are now, which is finally in a situation where it feels like we've got a book of revenue and a book of clients. There are going to be loads more challenges being thrown at us, but now it's about optimization of that go-to-market process, which is really kind of the second phase of this presentation is just talking through some of those basics with some examples. So just as a quick few learnings from that bit of journey, firstly, it is all about the people, trusting people, understanding people, retaining people. Secondly, almost all of the decisions you make in an enterprise startup are data poor. You don't have 1,000 cohort, 1,000 customer cohort where you can judge because there's a freemium model. They're paying such a low fee that you can onboard a huge amount of them. With enterprise, you have this very, very up and down model where suddenly one person lands, there's a huge amount of cash, and then nothing happens for 5 months, or you've got a deal cycle that is 9 or 12 months long. And so you've got to get used to making data poor decisions and then learning from them, rather than waiting until you've got enough data, until you've got statistical significance. Thirdly, and we're going to dig into this in depth in a second, becoming uncomfortably focused with the ideal customer profile. Like I'm a big believer in getting really uncomfortably focused on the person you're trying to sell to, knowing that actually you can sacrifice target addressable market if it means that you really understand who's in front of you. And then, as I mentioned in the opening, learning SaaS best practice, learning that actually some of this we didn't have to learn by trial ourselves, but we could learn from other people. And there's other great conferences and blogs. And at the end of this presentation, I've got a list of some of my favorites as a resource list for anyone who's interested to go and read further. But the SaaS best practice, build on top of that, build on the shoulders of giants. And then finally, back to your point, Stu, on some of the trials and tribulations, the main thing is not to die on the way. Really, I think our model, we've had a huge amount of mistakes, a huge amounts of failures along the journey. The one thing we've not failed at is dying. We've managed to managed to survive through all of those ups and downs, which has put us in a chance where we're in a game where we could succeed. But there are lots of ways that could have worked against us on that journey. So what I'm going to do then is break down some of what I feel are the SaaS fundamentals of this type of model. I'm going to talk about ideal customer profile. I'm going to talk about the concept of a whole product, about messaging, which I think is a really overlooked topic when you come into B2B sales, customer acquisition and our model and standard models of building a customer acquisition function, some basics on funnel metrics, some basics on revenue retention, and some basics on the cash engine. And all of these, I'm going to give examples from Idio and from other companies I know, but I'm going to try and make it real to our story. So it's not just, you can't just go and read it on another site. And I know, obviously, the more conversation, the better. So if any of these are of particular interest, then perhaps drop them in the chat to Stu, and I'll make sure I deep dive on those more, because we probably won't get time to go into full depth on any of these. In fact, every one of these could be a full hour webinar. And so, I'm going to try and restrain myself, and Stu's going to restrain me. So Stu, if you could just tell me to move along quickly if we're going too deep on any of them that people aren't recognizing as interesting, give me a wave. Or ask me any questions if you want to go deeper on any of these different topics. So let's start with ideal customer profile. So we all like to think we're focused, right? We all like to think that we understand our target market and we're focused on solving a pain for them. And we all probably get a bit nervous when people talk about things like, we're selling to 18 to 24-year-olds in North America, horrifically broad target markets. But let's look at this from a different perspective. So as I said, on the slide before, I'd rather face tough questions over total addressable market. Your market isn't big enough, some funders say, than I would to face questions I can't answer over understanding in detail the nuances of my target market. Because selling to the person in front of you and repeatedly being able to do that to people who have the same problem each time is the essence of any SaaS business. So as a business, we have gone through a process, and I've already reflected this, of choosing a market, realizing it's wrong, choosing a market, realizing it's wrong, choosing a market, realizing bits of it are right, some of it's wrong, tightening it. And part of the process of walking to where we are now has been that pretty much every quarter, maybe every 6 months, we've tightened our target market. In effect, it's got smaller, which venture capitalists don't really like to support. They like to have $1 billion market to go and fund. But as we'll walk through, it's important to know where you'll go next after you've conquered your ideal customer profile, but maintaining that as focused and niche is key. And one of the things one of our investors said to us was that focus isn't focus if it doesn't cost you something. And we're going to talk about some of those journeys of deciding focus when you actually have to say no to certain segments of your market, or say no to certain feature sets, or say no to things that actually could get you money or get you, prowess, or could get you marketing or whatever it might be, but you're choosing to say no to good things as a result of wanting to focus on the thing that really matters. And just, as indicative examples, there's the obvious people like, the Mark Zuckerberg story of focusing on Harvard and on kind of the face group profiles as his, that was the problem he solved, right? That was the thing he went after before he ever scaled to other colleges and then to the world. PayPal, if you read the book PayPal Wars or any of the stories of what they did, you'll see how their initial audience was, I think it was people with Palm Pilots that wanted to transfer money between Palm Pilots. Like, it was this disconcertingly small market. But once they'd got that, they realized that there were certain attributes there and they could solve a problem there that then applied to eBay power sellers. And eBay power sellers at that point was still quite a small market, but a bigger market. And that enabled them, winning each one of those different beachheads, enabled them to become the financial powerhouse that they are now. Uber.
Palm Pilot owners were very special people. It's good to target them.
You were one, Stu.
I borrowed one. I wouldn't say I was ever an owner. No. John's probably an owner in the last area.
Fair enough. and then the Uber story, that was initially a 3 limo timeshare for limos before they went and moved on. So don't be uncomfortable with going really, really small to start with. And just to bring this home, so we went through this process of constantly tightening our ICP, and we used this crossing the chasm metaphor. So Geoffrey Moore wrote this very famous business book that you've probably heard of, possibly heard of and never read if you were me a year ago. And crossing the chasm, he talks about how between the early market, your tech enthusiasts and your visionaries, there's this chasm that you've got to cross, because the rest of the market needs something more proven, more understandable, and more mature. And we found ourselves in this problem. If you read that book, the indicators, the diagnoses of where you are just felt very true to us, that we were able to sell into people who are visionary, but we really struggled selling into and retaining more pragmatic buyers. And if I go back about a year and 3 months ago, we had a problem because we were selling into these 3 verticals with 3 kind of go-to-market messages, with a whole range of different potential use cases like email personalization, web personalization, intent data, dynamic segmentation, marketing automation integrations, all these different ways of describing what we did. And we laid them out. We found 16 separate value propositions that we were going to market with. As a small company of 35 people or so then, that was just an impossible feat. When it came to product roadmap decisions, we had no idea which feature to do and which feature not to do, because they were all so complicated. We didn't know who was winning. So we went through this process of actually, judging our beachhead. So in that book, he talks about, it's an overly military metaphor, right? He's talking about the Normandy landings and D-Day and choosing your beach and then choosing your region, then choosing your country in order when you're trying to invade. It's a market entry metaphor. But if you pick a beachhead, you've got to pick something that's big enough to matter, but small enough that you genuinely can dominate it in a 12 to 18 month time horizon. It's got to be a good fit with your company's crown jewels, with your secret sauce, and you've got to be able to solve that problem end to end. So we went out, we stack ranked and did a round robin, all these different use cases. And we made the decision that we were going to focus on enterprise B2B tech. That decision, honestly, has been the kind of bedrock of our transformation over the last year and a half. Because what it meant, it was a very controversial decision, and some people left the company over it because asset managers, Citibank and Oppenheimer and AllianceBernstein and JP Morgan were really good money for us. And they were less mature, so they were less demanding, and so we could serve them easier. But we just knew that our technology solved a bigger problem with tech vendors, and the tech market was a much larger marketplace. So we knew that there were only a certain number of financial services firms that were at the level of maturity where we could sell into them. So I can dig into that in loads more detail in the Q&A if that's helpful. But basically we chose, we're going to sell into tech, enterprise B2B. We're going to define them really tightly. So we're going to pick that beachhead. We're going to solve the end-to-end problem, deeply understand it. Even though it's a harder problem to solve, and we've experienced churn within that sector previously, we believe that betting the business, the future of the business on the hard to solve problem is more valuable than trying to solve one of these other problems that actually there's a smaller pot of gold there, even though it's an easier problem to solve. And then drive that word of mouth, dominate the space, and importantly, know which beach we're going to next. So we're not saying the future of the company is on these subset of companies, but we're saying we're going to do this first and then know where we're going to go. And that's the essence of a strategy, right? You have to be really, really clear over that strategic journey. And amidst a whole load of other bad decisions and mistakes and problems, that was a good decision that we made. And since we've made that decision, our marketing has become so tight because we know who we're talking to. We don't have to talk to multiple verticals or personas. Our product roadmap has become tight because we know whose problem we're solving. We can build up partnerships and integrations, and we can work that well. And since then, we've closed IBM and Intel and Siemens and seen massive growth with Pega and boosted up at HP and a few other big clients. And so the results of this are now being shown in choosing a disconcertingly small beachhead. So we chose 340 accounts globally that we were going to go after. And we can walk through this go to market in the next section. But if you come to our website and you fill in a demo form and you're not on our target account list, we will ignore you. So there's that level of focus and detail that we know and understand these 340 companies. Now, a year later, it's actually about 530 companies. But we have gone through upfront 17 different qualification criteria for a company to get on our list. And if they're on our list, we know with a high degree of confidence that they have got the problem we solve, and they've got the ability to pay to solve the problem they've got, and that we could be a real success for them. And so that's the kind of end point of this crossing the chasm decision that's brought us to where we are now with a very focused target market.
So if I'm a great company and I'm looking for stuff like yours and I go onto the site and I fill in the contact form, but I'm not in your target, you're literally not going to respond to me.
Let me add some nuance there. So there's a few things, right? So firstly, there's geography. So we only sell into North America and Europe, right? So, but if you are from one of our target companies, but in a different geography, we will probably loop you in with that same sales rep, and we will have some conversation with you, but we won't be spending any effort going to you, right? So that's one caveat. The other caveat is that there's one person responsible in our business who will have a quick look at that website. And if he believes that that website and that business would validate across these 17 different metrics, then it'll be put in a pool to be distributed. But if those things don't happen, no, we don't even bother responding.
Oh, it's fantastic. It's fantastic. Hey, just a quick aside, we've got 3 questions in the Q&A from John. Can you see those okay?
I can't. Oh, let me see. Q&A. Cool. How do you know when you're ready to scale? How do you manage customer retention? What was your planned budget? Cool. Good questions. So let me answer one now and the second 2 as we go, if that's okay.
How much? Go for the last one. How much did the first 3 years in the US really cost?
Oh, I was going to answer the first one first. The US was painfully expensive. And it took us our 3rd team iteration to make it work. So our first team, the lead we put in place, ended up having to go back to his previous startup, and the people he'd hired dissipated. And that was probably 500,000 gone all in after,
dollars or pounds or shekels or euros or...
Wow. The more that the world goes the direction it's going in, dollars and pounds are the same, right? But yeah, that was dollars. Yeah.
Okay.
It was dollars. And, so in the first 3 years, it cost a huge amount of money, probably over $1 million. And basically that process has been the making of the company, because we're now an 80% dollar revenue company. So 80% of our business is out of US clients. So it cost a huge amount, but we knew it was the target market we had to go after. So I'll just answer the ICP question as well. So John's also asked, how many ICPs do you have to find now, and are you comfortable sharing these? So yeah, I mean, I can share some of them now. I don't have them in front of me, so it's going to be by memory. So we have one ideal customer persona, ideal customer profile at an account level, and it is basically B2B technology businesses with over 1,000 staff, based in North America or Europe. They need to have a high degree of technology maturity in their marketing function. So we need to have validated that they're using Eloqua or Marketo, Salesforce probably as their CRM. So we'll have a tech list that they'll have to kind of be using, and we can find out that from data providers, technographic providers. They also need to have a marketing structure internally that we understand how they measure their own marketing. So for example, having gated assets on their website, you have to fill in your details to receive, is basically an indicator that they've got some degree of maturity, because that shows that they've made a decision to get contact details off someone to do something with that contact detail. We also have some other kind of complexity criteria. So they have to have more than 10 products or services they're selling to market. They have to be in a defined market that they know and understand. They have to have, so when I say 10 products or services, let me revise that. So someone like GoToMeeting, the Citrix kind of stack, it's a big business, but it's not an Idio target account because they only sell really one thing to market. And so there's no complexity in their sales process, because if someone goes to them, you're trying to buy GoToMeeting. Whereas Intel, there could be a million different things you're trying to buy off them. So that's what I mean by complexity. So that's a quick rundown of the ICP. There's other things like, is content central to the buying experience on their website? So is their website just a contact us form? In that case, they're not useful for us, even if all the other things tick. Or are they clearly aggressive in publishing quality content? Because you'll have seen from that previous example of what Idio does, content is our proxy for customer intent. And so if they don't have enough content, enough breadth of content, enough content maturity, we're not going to be able to act in a good way. Cool. Then there's two final questions here. How do you manage customer retention? We'll come to that in a second when we get onto net revenue retention topic. And how do you know when you're ready to scale? So I don't think we ever asked that question, because we were always ready to scale and we were always too early on trying to scale. So we always thought we were there, and we were always pumping more money into it, and then realizing actually we weren't ready to scale. So we've made some mistakes on this process, right, that haven't killed us but have got close. An example of those is when we thought we were ready to scale in the European market, and so we hired more sales reps. Now, one of my points later in this presentation that we might not get to is that I will never do that again. I will never hire sales reps to match a market. I will raise marketing budget to generate lead volume to match a market. Because the problem we got was, we think the market's this big, therefore let's hire 5 new sales reps to go and attack them. Sales reps are expensive. What we ended up with was 4 sales reps that were twiddling their thumbs because they didn't have enough to do, or were doing very basic administrative outbound tasks, and therefore weren't hitting quota and weren't able to actually feed themselves from our marketing engine. And so because we hired the sales reps ahead of investing in building the pipeline, we actually lost several of those sales reps, and we weren't able to hire more good sales reps, because the first question a good sales rep asks if you're interviewing them is, what's your average team quota attainment? How are people doing? And if your current team isn't really busting their gut and doing well, then why on earth would a quality good new sales rep walk in and say, I'm going to do better, or I'm going to actually, this is a place I can really make some money? So that'll be an example where we thought we were ready to scale and we weren't, and we made the wrong decision about how to scale. And we'll dig into that in the next piece on customer acquisition. A good answer to that, which I should be able to give if we were intelligent and wise about this, and hopefully, second, third, fourth time round, I'll have more ability to do this well, is that, I think you're ready to scale when people are pushing at you beyond your capacity in that funnel. When that thing is overflowing rather than you scraping the barrel to hire that next person. Cool. Let me drop back into the presentation away from the Q&A, and we'll come to retention in a moment. Please feel free to interrupt if there's any more, Stu. Cool. Let me quickly stop on this. We won't spend time here, but as part of that same Geoffrey Moore book, there's this concept of the whole product that's got to solve a whole problem. Now, all of us, probably anyone on this call who is involved in any form of sales and marketing, you'll recognize you've got this challenge of pitching a product that's often delivers more than what your core feature set actually, when you open up your dashboard, actually delivers. You're trying to sell a bigger vision. And there's a good way of breaking this down is into what is your whole product. So in the concentric circles there on your right-hand side, your current software product might be the generic product in the middle. The expected product might be what the customer actually wants. And then you've got the augmented product and the potential product, the things you could build it into. And one of the things that we had to learn as you go through this crossing the chasm, your tech innovators are happy with the generic product, but your laggards, your more pragmatic buyers, they need the expected, the augmented, or the potential product. And so one of the things you've got to do in your product strategy is realize it's not just about software. You've got to fill it in the enterprise end. You've got to fill that gap, expand that concentric circle with other things. So if your product is in the middle, you've got to expand that gap with onboarding and support, with partnerships, with integrations, with education and certifications, with consulting, with a marketplace and platform and data and APIs. Because actually the problem someone's wanting to solve, if you take the Idio example, someone's wanting to solve a more efficient funnel for a global business like IBM, right? That's their problem. And if we walk in and say, our software search solution for one-to-one personalization on web will solve your problem, we're kidding ourselves and we're kidding the customer. But if we can wrap around this strategy, integrations, partnerships, we start to be part of that wider problem solution that they're actually reaching for. So again, it's good to read the book if you would want to dig that in more depth, but it was something that was really important to us to understand that it's not just about the product, it's about what we wrap around the product. It's about the people and the time, and the integrations and the go-to-market. Second topic within the SaaS fundamentals is messaging. I think this is hugely, hugely overlooked, and I really encourage you to get one of the Corporate Visions books. I think they're one of the best writers on this topic. I've just grabbed one of their graphics here. They talk a lot about creating a buying vision. The model we use internally is the model that they suggest, which is the 3 whys. Because most people, when they're buying from you, they actually don't end up making a decision at all. They stay with their status quo. So they're in an RFP or they're in a buying cycle with you and probably some other vendors alongside you. But their stats and other stats from analysts would show that maybe only 70% or 80% of people, that only 20 or 30% of people buy something that they were in market for. The rest of them just decide that it's too complicated or what they've got is fine and go back to their existing status quo. So when they're buying a new CMS or they're buying a new marketing automation tool or they're buying a new personalization product, the status quo is your biggest competitor. It's not other vendors. And so the first thing you've got to answer in your positioning and your marketing is why change? Because if you don't get them to convince that they need to change, then actually why now and why Idio are irrelevant questions. So building a framework around that is really important. So, and we can, if we want to later, again, this is a whole topic we could dig into and get it really under the skin on. Why change? And then once you've done why change, why now? And that's about quantifying the problem they're facing right now in a much more detailed and a much more credible way than they've quantified it. So Idio, we sell in to big marketing functions that probably already have 30, 40, 50, 100 staff. They want to become more relevant. And we are trying to tell them, you need to change. The reason you need to change is any more investment you pump into this function you've built is inefficient and wasted because you're thinking about it the wrong way. So do you realize you're thinking about it, that you have to use manual rules, manual teams, manual campaign structures? That's how you're thinking about it. Let's reframe the question. This is actually an efficiency problem. You don't have the automation at play to handle your complexity. Let's talk about that. And then you get people to decide, wow, I've got to change. And now they've reframed that and decided to change. You can now build a why now story based on the cost of staying the same, all of the money they're wasting, the problems that are coming their way, the competitors that are coming their way, the ways their customers are being dragged into other scenarios and other buyers. And then you've got a why now. And then you can battle in the why Idio on the more feature set comparison. So why change, why now, why Idio is a really good framework for thinking that through. And then secondly, it's about the graph on the right hand side and left hand side. It's all about unconsidered needs. Everyone you're competing with is selling into the considered needs. They want something to make their marketing more efficient. Therefore, they're going to look for some things that make marketing more efficient. But behind the scenes, every one of us can do a better job of thinking about what they're not considering right now. So to use the Idio example again, they might be looking for a personalization product, but their unconsidered need is that they can't scale any of the normal traditional Adobe test and target style personalization products unless they hire another 5 people on top of it to manage the software. So their unconsidered need is not the personalization product. It's an efficient automation system that sits behind global personalization. Now, if we don't make that real for them, they're not buying the thing that we're selling, and we've got no differentiation in the marketplace, and they'll probably buy Adobe because no one gets fired for buying Adobe. And so we've got to understand their unconsidered needs, and we've got to understand our unspecified capabilities. Because if we went into an Adobe face-off and said, hey, we're a better personalization engine, we're a tiny little vendor that you probably don't know or trust, but we think we're big shots and we can do it well and we've got a few client stories, we're going to lose every time. If we try and get into a competitive bake-off about how good our tech is, we're going to lose. But if we can have unconsidered needs that we understand and unspecified capabilities that we can understand and explain, then you start fighting in this area outside of the entire competitive landscape. So I'll stop there, but unconsidered needs messaging, I think, is a huge talking point that we can maybe dig into on another topic.
So, my friend, this is going very well, and your arms are moving around all over the place, which means I can tell you're very passionate about it. I see that we have maybe 9 minutes left. We've still got pretty much everybody that started with still with us, which is great. Mm-hmm. How do you want to use the 9 minutes most effectively?
So so basically what we've got to go through, and this has been good because we've been stopping, so I had made sure I got too much content anyway. So we've got customer acquisition models, what a funnel looks like, what net revenue retention looks like, and what cash engine looks like. So maybe we can just quickly stop and understand what would people like to look at: customer acquisition, or funnel metrics, or cash and revenue.
Okay, everybody, stick something in the group chat with what you prefer. Otherwise, we'll go with funnel metrics, which will be my choice. Okay, so you got 5 seconds to convince me that we shouldn't do funnel metrics. Okay. It's good. Either there's a major lag on my Wi-Fi, or how close first 5 customers is John Gale's one. Mm-hmm. Have you got anything about that on the first 5 customers? Customer acquisition model?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, how we closed our first 5 customers was I don't have any credibility in this network, right? And I was a young kid. I still am a young kid. So the way we closed our first 5 customers was I identified 12 people that I thought could pay for our software. And I wrote a blog post in detail critiquing one of their market moves or their recent earnings report, or something they said at a conference recently, in a positive way, but showing our credibility of thought through that piece. And I found a way via someone I knew that knew them, or by just sending it to them directly, or by turning up in their blog site referral links. I found a way of getting it across them so that then when I pinged them, I could say, you might know me from this piece. Why don't we talk? And I got meetings with all of those 12 people within 3 months.
That's pretty good. That's being relevant, right? Being relevant.
Yeah.
You've got some great funnel metrics, which you've talked me through before. And in particular, I like the SaaS benchmarks around the cost of acquisition to the lifetime value. Is there anything that you can share around that for people? Yeah.
So let me go through this super quick, and because it sets the background. So our model is we've got marketing. Marketing's job is just to talk to those target accounts that we've named and identified. Then we've got sales development. So this is inside sales. And we have a 1-to-1 ratio. So every sales rep manages 50 accounts or so, and they have one sales development representative alongside them that also manages those same 50 accounts. So that means they can deeply understand what they're talking about there. Then we have a solutions engineer that works alongside the enterprise rep, and then we hand over into customer success. So our funnel, the metrics for each stage of the funnel are target account engagement for marketing. So is there a buying group developing in that account? So are we seeing multiple people from that business showing up in our webinar and our content and our programs? Then in our sales development team, and they're calling and emailing in, are we building opportunities? Are we booking meetings? And then are those opportunities turning into meetings? Are those meetings turning into opportunities? Sales, then are we actually progressing people through those sales stages in a repeatable and predictable way? And are we closing business? And then pilot conversions, if that business is on a pilot, the solutions team are responsible for pilot conversion, and then customer success are responsible for renewal conversion. So this is the kind of activity that's going on there. Whole lot of stuff. Again, we can dig into this in huge depth at any point in time. But to your point, the 5 C's, which is Bessemer's way of understanding a SaaS business. Bessemer, a big West Coast funder, they talk about cash. So what's your runway? Committed MRR or ARR. So what's your guaranteed income from current contractual obligations? Churn. What are we going to lose and what are we going to win from our current booked business? Customer acquisition cost. So how much is it going to cost to get another customer like that? And then customer lifetime value. So the rules of thumb here become really interesting, because obviously if you've got more funding and a more aggressive growth cycle, you can afford to spend more customer acquisition cost. In the enterprise world, this stuff is costly, right? Field sales reps who travel around, who live in a hotel lounge and live in an airport lounge, are expensive. So I guess the rules of thumb I'd have here are that within a funded VC business, it's normal to have an 18-month payback period. So if your average contract value is $100,000 a year, it's pretty normal for CAC to be 150K. Now, that can feel really awkward, because what it means is they've got to be halfway through their second year of working with you before you've actually come back to break even on that customer. But that has to be on a belief that your churn is low, and therefore your customer lifetime value is long. 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, an infinite amount of years if you can bake yourself into their core stack. And so that means that the value of the customer isn't the 1 year they've signed for you, but it's the discounted future net present value. So you can say, okay, this customer's going to stay for 10 years, therefore they're worth $1 million, $1 million because they're paying 100 grand a year. And therefore, if we spend 150,000 to get them as a customer, we're all good. So I think it's really important to understand how much you can spend. Before you go and think about tactics and tools and how you go and do marketing, you've got to know what you can afford. And some people will be very diligent and keep it under 12 months. Some people, it's rare, I find, in SaaS for people to go much below 12 months. Much below 12 months probably doesn't mean you're efficient. It probably means you're under-investing in marketing, and therefore you're growing too slowly. In the SaaS world, your growth metric is your large predictor of value. So it doesn't matter if you're making profit or if you're already efficient if you're growing slowly. So yeah, that's just a couple of hat tips on that CAC, on making sure you've got good CAC. And the other thing I'd say alongside
you've given
CAC,
me a metric before, which was sort of 3.8, 1 to 3.8 for the CAC to the lifetime value. Is that a benchmark that you remember?
Yep. That sounds about right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and that will be about hours.
Okay.
I think there's 2 other things that you've got to factor into that. The first thing is then retention and growth. So there was a question earlier on retention, and and how do you retain? At this level, and our average contract value will be above that kind of 100 grand mark I just gave right now. You have to deeply know and understand that customer. You've got to understand what their problems are. You've got to understand the different people within that account and what their unique problems are. You've got to make sure you're delivering value against those. You've got to make sure you know well in advance if there's any risk of churn so you can navigate it. But fundamentally, there's 2 key metrics in retention you've got to watch. The first one is gross retention. So if you've got 100K worth of business, what % of it do you lose at the end of the year? And then the more powerful metric within SaaS, and that's important, but the more powerful metric is what people call net revenue retention. So if you've got 100K book of business, how much can you upsell or cross-sell on that 100K minus what you're going to lose in churn? So if you, and good SaaS businesses, and our book is exactly like this, will have a positive net revenue retention. So at Idio, because we've got a very positive upsell and cross-sell model, our churn, say we churn 10% a year of our cohort, we're actually upselling 20% on that existing book of business. So net, our existing book of business, if we sold no new logos, it would continue growing into the future because we continue year on year to sell more to that same book of business than the amount we lose in churn. So I know that's a little bit complicated and nuanced, but it's really important to understand, because once you've got an upsell pathway that's more powerful than your churn, then you've got a proper business, because you're not having to sell just to stand still.
That's fantastic. So I've got to call time on that one, which is a great time to do it. And we've got 2 quick questions to answer, and then we'll just do the closeout. So John Gale's question was, how do you manage customer retention? Which I guess we've done a little bit of work on there, but is there any one last one liner, sorry, that you'd like to add about customer retention?
Yeah, hire customer success managers that are super consultative and can be that whole product around your product. So your task to them isn't around making sure the person knows the product and likes it. Their task is to solve the customer problem. So their job is to take your generic product and make sure it's the potential product. And if that means them going on Upwork and finding researchers and doing research and going to the client site and doing pitch presentations and creating the board pack, let them do it, because their job is to actualize that whole product while you're building it.
Fantastic. And customer success is actually a topic for, I think it's next month or maybe the month after in a webinar. Sue's going to do one of those, so it's great.
Cool.
How challenging, this is from Lucas, sorry, how challenging is it to wrap around the product but keep focused but still avoid going into additional value propositions?
So I think that comes down to that strategy piece. You've got to know where you're going. And if you know where you're going, those questions become easy. So if you've defined your target market and you defined what those problems are that you're solving, then your battleground is drawn. And it's for us, we found it much easier once we'd got that definition. Because now all we have to do is poll a few of our big clients and get some generally relevant sample, and we've got a very good read on whether this is something worth putting in our feature set or not. So yeah, I think early on it's hard, and it's about making data poor decisions, and you've just got to go with your gut on some of that stuff, and you've got to market test it as much as you can. But as you go forwards, yeah, the challenge is on focus. The challenge is on continuing to say no to things that fall outside your battleground, your secret sauce, and not being afraid to partner on those things. There are things that Idio could have built that might have been cool for us to build and might have increased our annual contract value, but other people are already doing it. And so why don't we just partner in order to solve that whole product?
I liked that quote you used earlier, which was, I think it was something like, focus isn't focus unless it costs you something, which is a very hard, it's an easy thing to say, but it's a very hard thing to actually do in practice, particularly in the early stages where you're hoping that everything's going to give you revenue, right? And turning something away feels like a real lost opportunity. So very interesting. It's been a wonderful hour, and it's gone incredibly quickly. I hope everybody else has enjoyed it as much as I have. Just to close out, I guess I would say that Andy's available on the Canopy Coaching portal if you want to book a session with him to understand anything more that's come up today in a bit more depth, or to go into some of the follow-on stuff, then please set up a session with him. Like all of us on the portal, we're available for the half-hour virtual coffee sessions for free and everything, so just tap him up for that, and I think he's put the link there on the slide. The recording from today will be available on the Canopy Coaching Slack, which is available to all members of the community. And I think, Andy, you'll be able to send us the slides as well, so we can put it there onto the Slack.
Yeah, no worries.
Fantastic. So really appreciate everybody joining. And for all the people that have been on for the whole webinar, thank you so much. It's the first one of the year, and it's wonderful to have you with us. And Andy, round of applause from me. Thank you so much, my friend.
Yeah,
I'm
no
going to
worries.
grab back the host thing. Let me work out how I do that. And I will call that to an end. Thank you very much, everybody.